So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for coming. Let me welcome you on behalf of the United Nations Information Service to this press conference this morning. And more importantly, let me welcome you on behalf of the Office for Outer Space Affairs, whose director, Ms. Mazlan Otman, is sitting next to me. She will say a few words, and then our key star will then brief you about the actual topic of the press conference. The press conference itself is organized within the framework of the 56th session of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. The topic itself is not completely new to most of you who has been following the work of COPUOS, in the sense that asteroids has been on the agenda of COPUOS for quite some time. In fact, if you remember, a couple of weeks, maybe a few months ago, on the 20th of February, we did have a press conference for you with the UN Action Team on Near-Earth Objects with Sergio Camacho. But what makes this press conference especially unique is the guest that we have today with us. It's Mr. Charles Bolden, who is the administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's NASA short for you, of course. This is the first time that he's here, and this is, in fact, as far as I know, the first time in at least 30 years that the administrator from NASA is here. Mr. Bolden has been nominated, or was nominated, by President Obama and then approved or confirmed, rather, by the US Senate, and took up his office on the 17th of July in 2009, and has been since then the administrator, or the 12th administrator of NASA. This is not the first time, though, that he's with NASA. He has spent 14 years with NASA, and he has also flown 4 missions to space. 2 of those he has led. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here with us, sir. But first, Mazlan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Janos. And I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Office for Outer Space Affairs to this press briefing. Yes, we are deeply honored to have you here, Charlie. And quite excited at the fact that after more than 30 years, we have another administrator come, and especially to attend the meeting of our Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And that's where I would like to give you a little bit of background on what this committee is about. It is a Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It celebrated 50 years of its existence 2 years ago in 2011, at the same time as we celebrated 50 years of the first human space flight. It would have been nice to have you then there, Charlie. That would have been so perfect. But then you see that the United Nations is really uniquely positioned to be the platform for international cooperation in the peaceful uses and exploration of outer space. And so since our inception, the inception of the office, we turned 50 also last year. We are getting quite old here. We're talking about 50s. I'm sorry. And we have been playing that role, making sure the committee has all it needs to meet in order to foster international cooperation. But we as an office also have our own activities with regard to space, and one of them being the Human Space Technology Initiative, where we are hoping to assist developing countries in carrying out activities, more particularly carrying out experiments at the International Space Station or somewhere in space. And so that's why we are always excited about having astronauts around. So from the press release that I see, Mr. Bolden is going to talk more about the asteroid initiative. And I'd like to say here that we in the space business, we are victims to our own success, because people don't pay attention to us very much these days, because we've been so successful. Nobody bats an eyelid when, you know, the shuttle is launched, or when we send humans into space on the Soyuz rockets. Nobody, for an instance, recalls how dangerous or how fantastic this is, how a million things have to come into play in order for it to be successful. And this is why we need something like this asteroid initiative to make it all exciting again. And for us in the office, we need to keep people engaged and excited about space in order that people engage their minds about what space is about and therefore make our work successful. So thank you, Charlie, for coming here and especially to talk to us about this very, very exciting initiative. So please.
Thank you very much. Yesterday I had the distinct pleasure and high honor of addressing the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, where I discussed our strong partnership and an exciting new U.S. mission to capture, redirect, and explore an asteroid, which will have significant planetary protection and deep space exploration implications for the entire world. The history of the committee and the history of NASA both date from the late 1950s, and over the years, UN COPUOS has proven to be an effective catalyst for international cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space, as Dr. Othman has just said. Since its inception, NASA has vigorously supported the goals of the United Nations and its various space-related entities, including the Office of Outer Space Affairs and UN COPUOS. President Obama and I share the belief that the success of our modern space programs will be judged in part on how well we continue to make space exploration a global partnership. The President and our Congress have crafted a blueprint for NASA that builds on America's leadership role in science and technology, improves life on Earth, and protects our home planet while creating well-paying jobs and strengthening the American economy. It was NASA's great pleasure yesterday to announce that 4 men and 4 women who will make up the astronaut corps astronaut class of 2013. This amazing group is going to be front and center, helping us carry out all of these great plans. We're delighted with the overall diversity of the class and elated that half of them are women, particularly in this year that we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the flight of Valentina Tereshkova as the first woman in space, and the 30th anniversary of the flight of Sally Ride as the first American woman in space. Our blueprint also supports our growing collaborations with our international partners. For example, all partners agreed to extend the life of the International Space Station, the ISS, the springboard to NASA's next great leap in exploration, to at least 2020. In addition to all the science and research on human health that continues to be conducted on the ISS, one of the station's historic achievements is how it demonstrates that many nations can work together on a project of enormous scope, complete it, and then keep it going. 15 nations contributed to the development and assembly of the ISS, and to date more than 68 nations have participated in some form of ISS utilization. A second area of shared interest with our international counterparts is the global space community's interest in traveling farther than we've ever ventured into deep space. President Obama has set goals of sending humans to an asteroid by 2025 and to Mars by the 2030s. We're on track for fulfilling these goals and making progress in developing the launch vehicle and spacecraft needed to carry astronauts to the deep space destinations of an asteroid and Mars. We're pleased that this effort has international support. In January, NASA and the European Space Agency announced that when Orion spacecraft blasts off for its initial fully integrated test in 2017, an ESA-supplied service module will power it. A third area of shared interest is our desire to improve international cooperation in the detection and characterization of near-Earth objects, and for developing plans for dealing with these objects that threaten Earth. NASA strongly supports the recommendations of UN COPUOS's Scientific and Technical Subcommittee regarding NEOs, and we are moving out on new work in this area. As I mentioned, we've begun work on an asteroid initiative that will engage the expertise of every part of our agency, as well as America's scientific, academic, aerospace, and manufacturing industries in a collaborative effort that will benefit all humankind. We envision an important role in this initiative for international participation as well, and it's one of the reasons I'm here in Austria and plan to travel to Italy later this week. The centerpiece of our asteroid initiative is the first ever attempt to identify, capture, and redirect an asteroid. We plan to use high-power solar electric propulsion system to rendezvous with, capture, and redirect a small asteroid into a stable orbit in the lunar vicinity. From there, our astronauts will be able to visit and return samples using the Orion spacecraft, the ESA ATV service module, and our heavy lift rocket. Aside from advancing our understanding of the nature of these mysterious objects and how we might protect our planet from them, this initiative will provide valuable experience in future mission planning and operations. Thank you. These missions will include, but not be limited to, future deep space missions, including our planned visit to Mars. NASA is also helping to develop a strong American commercial industry. We are turning over cargo and eventually human transport to ISS and other low Earth orbit destinations to private companies, so we can focus on building our next generation deep space capabilities. Other major projects underway include additional robotic missions to Mars, a planned 2018 launch of the James Webb Space Telescope, which again is an international venture, will be launched on an Ariane rocket out of Kourou, and greater collaboration with international communities to better understand Earth's systems and climate and the dynamics between our planet and the sun. I should note that I was pleased to hear that COPUOS has added space weather to its agenda. For more than 50 years, the United States, working in partnership with COPUOS and many of its member states, has taken leadership role in the peaceful uses of outer space, and we look forward to strengthening those partnerships. NASA is embarked on an exciting and challenging journey to better understand and establish human interactions in much farther regions of our solar system and the universe than ever imagined possible. I hope everyone served by the media present here today will want to join us as we press forward. Thanks very much for allowing us to be here today, and I think we're looking forward to taking questions.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we are. The floor is yours. Please identify yourself and the media you represent. Yes.
I'm Jonathan Tyrone with Bloomberg News. Mr. Bolden, could you tell us a little bit about the criteria for selecting the asteroid that will be explored, and give us some details about deadlines, dates for
Sure.
when you want to actually identify that asteroid? And also, I'll follow up after.
Okay, and let me very simply, the ideal asteroid for the initiative as we see it presently is one that is 7 to 10 meters in diameter, in that approximate size, weighing about 500 metric tons. So that is the basic criteria, one that is stable or relatively stable in its rotation. The problem with small asteroids is the smaller they get, the more they tend to be rotating or tumbling. We have already identified, I think the number is 3 candidates that are in this size. As I have heard, the worst rotation rate is about 2 degrees per minute, which we think is well within our ability to match the rate with the vehicle once we get there. We have, we're looking at big asteroids also, because a lot of them have capabilities that we might be able to use, but that's the basic criteria that we're looking for.
And we've heard this term gravity tractor in the past. Is that one of the options that you'd be deploying to control it?
You've not heard me use the term gravity tractor. However, being a science fiction buff, I keep asking about the gravity tractor. As the NASA administrator, I'm allowed to do those kinds of things. And your mention of that is the exact reason that back in Washington today, even as, well, not yet, since we're a little bit ahead of them, but later today, we will be hosting at NASA headquarters what we call an industry day on the asteroid initiative, in which we're opening up our auditorium to anyone who is interested in asking questions like you. We want to talk about the initiative. We want to have industry, academia, private citizens, and our international partners there. So we extended an invitation to all the international partners, and at that time, people much more well-versed in this than I, so they're getting the real formal presentation. You get me. But they're going to talk about the initiative, and it is the beginning of conversation among people who are of like minds on just how we should formulate this mission. So the mission will be in formulation this summer, and that's going on actually today back in Washington.
Okay, so just one final follow-up then.
Yeah.
do I take that then as saying the technology hasn't really been invented yet to control an asteroid?
You said it better than I. People, let me ask a question that I thought somebody might ask. Why an asteroid? Why not just go back to the moon? Because we do get asked that question all the time. To do the asteroid mission, the technology is not developed yet. To go back to the moon, we have the technology we need, but there are other challenges that make it not the place that America wants to lead right now. We are about doing things that have never been done before. That's what NASA's hallmark is. And we know how to do solar electric propulsion. We don't have a capability to produce large-scale solar electric propulsion in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 kilowatts. And I know that may not mean much to most people in here, but imagine, you have bulbs in your house. If you want a really bright bulb, then you get 150 watt or something like that. If you really want cool light and you don't want to spend a lot of money on the electricity, then you go get 10 watt and 30 watt bulbs and the like. We're looking for 150, 250 watt bulb to put. We want a big bright light, and in order to do that, we need much larger solar arrays than we have ever produced before. That may sound easy, but the larger the solar array, the more complex becomes the mission of packaging that in something that you can launch on a rocket. So it means it's got to be made into a very compact package that's then going to open up. The best example I can give you is the James Webb Space Telescope. If you've ever seen the animation of James Webb in its deployment, it launches on an Ariane spacecraft, up in the shroud, and when the shroud goes away and it gets on orbit, it deploys, and it's the size of a tennis court. That's a lot of money worth of technology development and a lot of years in stuff that we didn't have before. So it is along the lines of the development of the technology for the James Webb Space Telescope that we're talking about. This is, again, it's not easy, and that's why I like talking about it. We do things that aren't easy, so we're really excited. That's one of the reasons we're excited.
Next question.
And they can answer questions too. That's all right.
The lady and then the gentleman, please.
Okay, you were talking about the international. Oh, excuse me. My name is Karen Kriechmer, der Standard Vienna, and I would like to know, you were talking about the international cooperation, Mr. Bolden, and yeah, there will be a lot of players in space in the near future. What does this cooperation include? Also with corporate space flight or other players like China and Asian countries that the NASA will?
The reason I came to UN COPUOS, one of the primary reasons to be here this week, is because UN COPUOS has had asteroids on their mind for decades. And actually, we are sort of following their lead in this case. There have been people like Rusty Schweikert, Ed Lu, and others who have come to UN COPUOS through the years to promote the importance of humanity understanding this threat that, that people, scientific people know is out there, but the average American and person of Vienna or Germany or anywhere else, the average citizen is sort of oblivious to the threat. It is like a hurricane or a tornado. Asteroids are natural disasters. We cannot today do any more with an asteroid than we can do with a hurricane. The good thing about an asteroid is that we think, unlike other natural disasters, we can avert it because we can actually intercept. We think we can actually intercept an asteroid and cause it to vary its course ever so slightly, avoiding impact with Earth. That keeps us from everybody. This phrase has become old, but I still like it. It allows us to avoid becoming like the dinosaur. And but it's exciting to think that there is at least one natural disaster that we know of that as recently as February 15th caused injury to over 1,000 people in Russia. And there was nothing we could do about it. We, even if we had known it was coming, and we didn't in that case, there was nothing we could do about it, other than the fact that we would have alerted people that there's an asteroid inbound, and it's probably going to impact somewhere in Asia. And that's about as good as we would have been able to do. And that's not very good, not for humanity today, as smart as we are. We ought to be able to take on that particular challenge and do something about it, and we can.
Okay, just to have one follow-up, and what would be ideas to really protect us against?
What would be the idea?
Yeah.
The big idea to protect the planet, and I don't want to make this bigger than it is, because in responding to the first question, we picked a relatively small asteroid, and everyone should be aware that demonstrates, if we're successful, it demonstrates that we can, in fact, that humanity can, in fact, interact with an asteroid inbound to Earth and cause it to veer off its trajectory. Because what we want to do is it's about a year, and we're not talking about going up and doing something today and it happens. Once we get to the asteroid and we either capture it or start guiding it, we think it's about a year to a year and a half in moving it very gradually from its intended path toward Earth to a path that takes it close enough to the moon that it's captured by the moon's gravity and then goes into orbit, in a retrograde orbit around the moon. Our scientific evidence says if we can get it there, we can put it into a stable orbit where it'll stay for about 100 years. That's Nobel Prize kind of stuff. Where you have taken an asteroid, you have taken essentially something that is natural and you've altered it, and I think that's a big deal. So that's the intent. Now, and I caution everybody, because again, that's a small asteroid. Can we do the same with one that is a civilization killer? The one that struck in Chelyabinsk, I am told, was about a 30-meter asteroid. That's in the category of those that we aren't able to identify very well yet. That's in the 10 to 20% range of those that we've identified to date. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of them that we know exist. A 30-meter asteroid gets through the atmosphere and impacts cities and regions and things of that nature. So that's the critical importance of the identification part, the very first part. And that, if nothing else, continues a decades-long effort, international effort, to identify and track asteroids. It is an international effort in which we've been embarked for many decades. 2014, 2012 DA-14, which was the asteroid that had everybody's interest on the day that the asteroid struck Chelyabinsk. We have been tracking 2012 DA-14 for at least a year. That one was actually discovered, I am told, by an amateur astronomer in Spain somewhere, and then reported to the Minor Planet Center, run by the Smithsonian Institution, and that put it into the international process. So the U.S. doesn't do any of this stuff alone, and that's what's important about my being here, is to say it is already an international effort, is tracking and identifying these asteroids. We want to extend the effort to actually deflecting it or redirecting it.
Gentleman promised here.
Christian Müller from the Austrian press agency, APA. I have a couple of naive questions. First, are asteroids in this size, you talked about 7 to 10 meters, are they on a stable track around the sun? So
yes.
So you really can count it, you will meet it.
Yes. Again, let me give you my explanation, okay? And I will temper what I say by the fact that the real asteroidologist is in another room here. Lindley Johnson is here from our team at NASA, who is an expert. So I'm telling you what he's taught me. Asteroids tend to be in a primary asteroid belt that most of the time is orbiting between Mars and Jupiter. And we don't worry about them. That's why we don't worry about them. But asteroids are sometimes in circular orbits, frequently in elliptical orbits, and they come inside Mars. Some of them come way inside Mars, and they end up between Earth and our moon. Those are the ones that really get our attention. but they are stable. The problem is that until we identify them and have an opportunity to track them for some period of time, the longer you can track them, the more precisely you can characterize their orbit. And that's what we really want to know. And that's why we can't just look up and say, okay, let's pick an asteroid today and we've got it. Scientists have to spend some time characterizing its orbit, characterizing its rotation rate, because with radars today, once we identify it and begin to track it, we can learn quite a bit about its characteristics, what it's made of. Is it a rubble pile? Is it just a bunch of rocks all thrown together that you really don't want to get anywhere close to? Because if you do, you're going to cause it to disaggregate, and now instead of having one small asteroid, you've got a whole bunch of them. So we've got to be very careful and deliberate in identifying and characterizing and making sure that we have the correct asteroid. And that was not a naive question at all. I didn't know the answer until I asked it anyway.
I've got the second one.
That's okay. That's okay.
Why do you want to put it in an orbit around the moon, and why don't you bring it back to Earth?
The reason we want to put it in an orbit around the moon and bring pieces of it back to Earth, we do want samples of it to come back to Earth, but we only need 1.5 kilograms to do valid scientific analysis and studies, and you don't really need to bring an entire asteroid back to Earth. The reason to put it in a stable orbit around the moon is because it gives humanity 100 years to think about what they want to do with it. Does the rest of the world want to at some time fly a mission there and study it? Is the UN over time able to reach agreements? Because there are all kinds of implications to what we're about to do. Dr. Othman and I were talking the other day about the legal team here being heavily engaged now among all the nations in determining, okay, who has rights to the asteroid, and she can talk a lot about it because they've been working on it quite a bit, and nothing is simple. Let me put it that way. So we put it in a stable 100-year orbit in the lunar vicinity. It does a number of things for us. We like that because in testing the SLS and Orion, the heavy lift launch vehicle and Orion, and getting it ready for the ultimate mission to Mars, an orbit around the moon puts us far enough into deep space that if something happens, we can come home. When you're on the way to Mars, you're on the way to Mars. So it gives us an opportunity. The first flight of an integrated Orion and SLS will be in the lunar vicinity, and we know that already. We've established that as a given. So it would be ideal if the asteroid were already there and we could make it the third segment of the asteroid initiative. If not, then we'll still do a cislunar or translunar flight of the SLS and Orion, because we've got to make sure that our environmental control and life support systems on Orion are suitable for deep space exploration. So personally, for the United States, there are a number of selfish reasons to put it, in the lunar vicinity. Some of our international partners, for example, are very interested in putting robotic missions on the surface of the moon. And it gives us and them a vantage point from which you can actually control robotic activity on the surface of the moon. Buzz Aldrin has been here and spoken to this body, and he talks about being on the surface of one of Mars's moons and doing robotic activities. Those are all what we're doing are precursors, or is a precursor for future exploration of Moon, Mars, and beyond. We're just kind of setting the groundwork for everybody else to follow.
Pallav Bagla, I'm the science editor for New Delhi Television, all the way from India here.
I'm following you home, I think.
Lovely. We will love that. A question for you on the international cooperation, following up on that. I'm aware you're not allowed to cooperate with China, but is there any cooperation on the asteroid mission with India, especially because India is planning to undertake a mission to an asteroid soon and a Mars mission this year?
I was not kidding about following you home. After here, we go to Rome to talk a little bit with our Italian partners about the mission and about other issues of collaboration. And then from there, I will be with Secretary of State Kerry in the third U.S.-India dialogue, and a part of that will be just a very preliminary discussion about cooperation in space with the head of ISRO, and the asteroid initiative will be among the things that we'll talk about when we get there.
Risk sharing and cost is the big issue. Is that why you are looking for international cooperation? Sorry.
The reason we're looking for international cooperation, in my opinion, is because I think the things that we are trying to undertake today are global types of issues, and they are bigger than any one nation can or should undertake. Just the discussion we were having just now about the legalities of interacting with an asteroid, it would be frivolous for the United States to think that we could go and do an asteroid initiative and decide for ourselves how everything's going to be handled in that regard. Those are global issues that need to be discussed and decided among global fora like the United Nations and UN COPUOS. So there are a variety of reasons that they be international, the primary one being we don't do things that are small enough that one nation can undertake them anymore.
Very quick one, very quick one in the back, and that's the last question.
Okay, thank you. Milan Ilic is my name, and I write for Delo from Ljubljana and Nin from Belgrade. Human civilization has already, how to say, some kind of experience in intercepting, missiles like, anti-ballistic, like Patriot missiles. And talking about asteroids, there were several, proposals how to say it, disable them, and one of them is to use atomic weapons somewhere in the space, or some kind of, or maybe protection belt to have of atomic weapons in the space. Do you think that it is viable as a solution against asteroids?
I am not the expert in that at all. It was interesting. Dr. John Holdren, the President's Science Advisor, and General Shelton, who's responsible for what you talk about, defensive methods to do things, and we participated in a hearing before the House Science Committee on Asteroids, and that question kept coming up. I think the three of us agreed, at least, so there are three people who think that using weapons against an asteroid is probably not a good tactic, because what you do is you take a single problem and you turn it into multiple problems. I talked about, even contact with some asteroids would result in their disaggregation or their breaking up. Another reason that we chose a 7 to 10 meter asteroid as the first target is if something goes wrong and we end up deflecting it toward Earth, scientifically we believe that size asteroid would not get through the atmosphere. It would disintegrate before getting through the atmosphere. So even if this will be a risky endeavor, and we chose to do so, and so even if something goes wrong, we don't think that an asteroid of that size would make it through the atmosphere and cause damage. But the answer to your question is, I don't think that would be a viable alternative, but that's not my decision. That is the purview of the Department of Defense, and I'll leave that to General Shelton and others. Can I ask for one more question? And that's, Vladimir had a question over here, and I want him to be able to go back to the Vienna International School and give his report. So Vladimir, you got to put your mic on right there. Just press it, and you'll see the red light.
I wanted to ask you a question. What's your landing trajectory going to be on the asteroid?
I knew I shouldn't have let Vladimir answer that. What is the? Oh, Lindley is here. I'm gonna.
Are you gonna go like that, or are you gonna pass through the back and land on it?
Great question. Lindley, you want to try to answer that question? This is Lindley Johnson. Remember, I told you, come on up here. I told you I brought an expert along, and I don't know whether you heard Vladimir's question. We may not have an answer yet, Vladimir, but his question is, what is the trajectory as we approach the asteroid? So, help yourself there.
Well, it will all depend on what the target asteroid is and what orbit it is in. The approach trajectory, it'll make a difference on what the dynamics of the asteroid are. You know, how fast is it rotating, and those kinds of things. So until we know exactly what target asteroid we're going to approach, those decisions will depend upon the target asteroid.
One of the things we've discovered, Vladimir, and it's been really interesting in working on with Lindley and everybody else on this thing, is we really thought we knew how to operate in space because we've been operating 30 years on the, on shuttle, and we've rendezvoused with satellites. We rendezvous on a routine basis with the International Space Station. Approaching an asteroid is going to be nothing like that, and we discovered that, and so this is new.
Yes, it's very new and a higher level of operations. I would say you're operating at speeds that are a lot greater than you do in Earth orbit. Earth orbital speeds are 7 kilometers a second or something like that. Well, we have to operate at 12 to 17 kilometers a second to reach the orbital velocities that these objects are at.
You got all that?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much. Good.
Okay, thanks.
Great question.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Mr. Bolden. Thank you very much for your time. And you can catch Mr. Bolden today at 2:30 at the Natural History Museum. He's going to be there for a public event, presentation of a lunar rock, if you're interested. Thank you very much for coming. We did have a press conference for you with the UN Action Team on Near-Earth Objects with Sergio Camacho. But what makes this press conference especially unique is the guest that we have today with us. It's Mr. Charles Bolden, who is the administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That's NASA short for you, of course. This is the first time that he's here, and this is, in fact, as far as I know, the first time in at least 30 years that the administrator from NASA is here. Mr. Bolden has been nominated, or was nominated, by President Obama, and then approved or confirmed, rather, by the U.S. Senate, and took up his office on the 17th of July in 2009, and has been since then the administrator, or the 12th administrator of NASA. This is not the first time, though, that he's with NASA. He has spent 14 years with NASA, and he has also flown 4 missions to space. 2 of those he has led. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here with us, sir. But first, Mazlan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Janos. And I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Office for Outer Space Affairs to this press briefing. Yes, we are deeply honored to have you here, Charlie. And quite excited at the fact that after more than 30 years, we have another administrator come, and especially to attend the meeting of our Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And that's where I would like to give you a little bit of background on what this committee is about. It is a Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. It celebrated 50 years of its existence 2 years ago in 2011, at the same time as we celebrated 50 years of the first human space flight. It would have been nice to have you then there, Charlie. That would have been so perfect. But then you see that the United Nations is really uniquely positioned to be the platform for international cooperation in the peaceful uses and exploration of outer space. And so since our inception, the inception of the office, we turned 50 also last year. You're getting quite old here. We're talking about 50s. I'm sorry. And we have been playing that role, making sure the committee has all it needs to meet in order to foster international cooperation. But we as an office also have our own activities with regard to space, and one of them being the Human Space Technology Initiative.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for coming. Let me welcome you on behalf of the United Nations Information Service to this press conference this morning. And more importantly, let me welcome you on behalf of the Office for Outer Space Affairs, whose director, Ms. Mazlan Othman, is sitting next to me. She will say a few words, and then our Key Star will then brief you about the actual topic of the press conference. The press conference itself is organized within the framework of the 56th session of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. The topic itself is not completely new to most of you who has been following the work of COPUOS, in the sense that asteroids has been on the agenda of COPUOS for quite some time. In fact, if you remember a couple of weeks, maybe a few months ago, on the 20th of February,
where we are hoping to assist developing countries in carrying out activities, more particularly carrying out experiments at the International Space Station or somewhere in space. And so that's why we are always excited about having astronauts around. So from the press release that I see, Mr. Bolden is going to talk more about the asteroid initiative. And I'd like to say here that we in the space business, we are victims to our own success, because people don't pay attention to us very much these days, because we've been so successful. Nobody bats an eyelid when, you know, the shuttle is launched, or when we send humans into space on the Soyuz